Mhm.
12 years never gets old. Asher, thank you so much for being here, brother. Gosh, it's good to have you in this space.
Yeah, it's an absolute pleasure to be here. And this space is beautiful.
Thank you, Ryan.
Yeah. Mm.
You're the first guest on the iSOMA podcast. Thank you so much. And it makes sense for me, since you will be one of the first guests in our 12-month path, bringing in story, weaving in the magic of what you do, your heart's work, or part of your heart's work. And I was driving up the mountain to get here today thinking it's not like we're just going to throw Asher in there and bring him in. Like, it's a deep weaving of everything we will do for the whole 12 months. And, I know we get that at some level, but I was really sitting with like the fundamental weaving that you are and you will be in this, and the spirit of the stories you bring in. And it's really huge. So I just wanted to speak to that and name that and honor that. Thank you.
Wow, it's a real honor to hear that from you too. I mean, just the opportunity that you've provided for me to jump into this container is really special for me, Amber. I mean, we've kind of danced around together with our work, but this is really the first time we've kind of really kind of stepped into a crucible together.
Yeah.
And that it really is a great honor for me. And also, Kurt, you, brother, like I really honor the work that you do. I feel like I'm just kind of getting to know you, but each time we take a little step together, I kind of feel like I learn something more about the depth of who you are. And it's a real honor to kind of step in together. So thank you too, brother. And just speaking to the idea of story, I love the way you frame that, because sometimes I feel in some of these teachings, I guess, it's almost like a plug-in. It's like, well, let's just get someone to come in and tell a story. The way you've described that is the way it should be. Is that the story provides, the deep underpinning, which is always there. It's it's almost like a continuous om in the background.
Yeah.
And everything that happens within the teachings and within the work kind of moves within that energy. As you know, a lot of my deep roots comes from the work of the Minnesota Men's Conference, and that's the way it's done.
Mm.
You know, the story is told throughout, you know, each retreat, each conference, and it works its way into the men's bones throughout the time that they're there.
Yeah.
It's not just a separate piece. It's the heartbeat.
It is. And, you know, after you said yes, albeit last minute, to coming into the men's rights that we did last year, and the way that we were able to receive and witness the, you know, the impact, the movement inside of those men, and what that moved and how that held what we were doing, I felt there's no way I can do anything different ever again. That has to be a part of our work. And I really feel that. And we've always had a story in the sense of the teachers that come in always bring their story, their lineage, and the stories from their lineage, and the songs. But it's a completely different bandwidth and you know, it's a framing, but it's a holding. It feels like it's both, the way that you know, somatically touches them, and what it moves and what it awakens. It was just, it gave rhythm. You could feel the spirit of the stories of I and John come in, and then backed up by you know, the story that you brought after, and the complementary way that was woven is how I imagine we were always held through rites for forever, you know, wherever we came from, whoever our ancestors were. So it's just, I'm so excited. I'm so excited to see what stories want to come through you, what you want to bring, and you have such a broad background, such a nuanced background, which I'd love to speak to. I'd love to learn even more about you in here. Do you have any questions or anything's coming through for
I
you?
just, yeah, off the back of that, we just to frame that for those listening and watching, we had Asher join us at a men's gathering, rites of passage work we were doing with a group of men, and that was the first time I had experienced such artistry in that field of storytelling. Like I'd never heard such a great story in my life, you know, and it moves you, you know, in the way that you carry that and have like built relationship with these living beings, these living spirits that are these stories. It just hit everything right at the heart. Like I was like, this is how a story is supposed to be told. This is the way you know, just from start to finish, your invocation to like really speaking to and communicating clearly, like this is a living being. The story is living, it's alive, it's listening to you. Are you listening to it? Like that, first off, is my jam in every way. I look for that depth of connection, but just really, really appreciate how you're carrying these spirits with you, and how you walk with them, and how you let them continuously guide you and teach you and work you. You know, I remember you saying like, you gotta let the story work you, you know, and you can tell in the way that you deliver and facilitate that and care for it with such reverence and respect that you've allowed yourself to be so open to be worked by these stories, which to me is so just so precious and so at the core of what we're doing with iSōma too. It's like about letting the work you, yeah, chiseling and refining and you know, putting those nuanced grooves in where they need to, earning our feathers with this work to be able to walk not in knowledge but in wisdom. And I feel like that's why we're such a good fit, and why we're, you know, Amber and I are both so excited to have you on board here, is because you're living what it is that we really want to essentially bring and to teach. Is that it's not just something to listen to or something nice. It's like you've lived it, you've let it work you, and as a result of that, you can carry it with wisdom, and you've earned your feathers with it. So I just wanted to not that that was going anywhere. I just want to speak to that and frame that for everyone listening that hasn't experienced you. Just such beautiful, refined artistry, like maestro level shit, man.
Wow. What do I do with that? Thank you so much, man. That's no, I really appreciate the words, and I think, you know, as you were speaking, what was coming through for me was, you know, these stories really are our ancestors. Like this is ancestor work.
Yeah.
That's what it is. And just opening yourself up to hear, and you don't have to do anything with it. That's the point. It's like, as you said, you just have to let it, you know, work you from the inside out.
Yeah.
You know, these stories, that they're already in our bones. You know, in a sense, we already know them. I feel like oftentimes the job of a storyteller is to help you remember. You know, yeah, I feel like saying, you already know this story, right? You know this story, like deep down in your bones, and let me help you remember it. Let me help you wake it up, you know, because you're speaking to people through story at the level of soul. You know, this is soul language. The logos word, you know, the world that we live in of cold hard facts, it gives you knowledge, but it isn't giving you that wisdom. You know, I like to say knowledge is kind of outside in.
Yeah.
Like I read a book, I take in whatever was written, and I memorize it, whereas story is inside out.
Yeah.
You know, and that's wisdom. Yeah. It's
I'd
a
love
fountainhead.
to.
Yeah.
I'd love to know who, like, what was it that brought you to,
This is
like,
where I was.
who reminded you of story, you know?
Look, I've felt I have felt the power of storytelling since as long as I can remember. I you know, and I think this is true for a number of people. Like I have always found myself being lit up by the language of story, more so than the language of, you know, we talked about the cold hard facts. It's just, I remember, you know, as a young child hearing a story, you know, as we all did. Well, I'm sure most of us at some point of, you know, someone's told us a story.
Yeah.
And for me, I could just float away on those stories. Like the images seemed so rich and so vivid. It was almost like this part of the child inside me saying, "Oh, you can see that too." You know, it's like I'm not crazy. You know,
Yeah.
And it was my language. I really felt that, and you know, and as I grew up, that developed into a deep love for poetry and anything in that realm. You know, I spent probably an inordinate amount of time in my room, you know, sifting through, you know, Byron and Shelley and Yeats, and you know, and when I was young, in some ways you could possibly call it an escape from, you know, what might be described as a bit of a difficult childhood.
Yeah.
So it gave me an opportunity to kind of be somewhere else. So that I guess in some way you could say it was a little bit of escapism, but at the same time it was a moving towards as well, because I could feel deep inside me that it was my place.
I resonate with that. When Harry Potter came out, I was 11 and he was 11, and it was my world away from hell, you know, and I feel that simultaneous like draw to being held in the world of magic. It's like it kept the magic alive in me in a time that there wasn't a lot of magic directly in my sphere. And I've thought about it a lot, and I've read those books, honestly, at least 100 times. And they carried me, and I feel that. And it's more of a, you know, it's more pop story, but I was a child, and it worked with me and really kept that magic. So, but yeah, escaped as well. Was like, and I would always feel it. I'd put the book down and I'd be like, whoom, almost back into reality again. Okay. But it was relief at the same time.
I think there's always a move away from and a move toward aspect of this, of what we're talking about here. So that doesn't surprise me. And also, you know, it's the same stuff. Like, you know, you see it in the world of, the Lord of the Rings and the Game of Thrones and even back to books that I remember as a child, like the Narnia Chronicles and things like that,
Love
right?
Narnia.
The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe and all that stuff. But there is a pull, and I believe it's a soul pull.
Mm-hmm.
I believe it's the soul calling to you and saying, like, this is the stuff.
Yeah.
Because we go to school and the education system's rigid and it says, I guess the analogy that's coming to mind, and I use this a lot to say that, when we go to school, and, we all have kids around this table, so you'll understand it. But the way that school is set up, it's that outside in learning, and it's lesson, and then at the end of it all, test. And storytelling and everything we're talking about here is the flip of that. It's test followed by lesson, right? And so, and that's the general, cadence of all these old stories. Person goes out, gets tested, learns a lesson.
Yeah.
Right. And to me, that's the soul. That's that's the education of the soul.
And that reminds me of, like, if we zoom out on the bigger picture of the way that we function or dysfunction on a broader scale in a lot of ways. Not everyone and not everything, but a lot of our world has this cadence, good word for it. And something that we really work with and look at and try to bring back into the fold as both a beautiful and brutal part of life is the bit where we pause, the bit in between, the void, the descent, the grief. And it's one of the things I deeply admire about you and feel I receive and learn from you in every single interaction, the way that you live with grief and the way that you hold that bigger picture of the cycle. For you, perhaps introducing parts of the way that grief has touched you and your own journey with it would be a beautiful place to begin. And then I'd love to know how story held you through that.
It's a big question, Amber. Trying to find my way in. Look, I think grief is such an enormous part, if not the biggest part of the soul's journey, and I think particularly in this culture, it's all about ascent, it's all about rise, it's all about peak experiences up here, But taking the very beginning of that question, Amber, you talked about, I mean, for me, two of the biggest soul words are slow and down. Slow down, and I think that's the antithesis of kind of what we experience when we step out our door every morning. It's all about up and fast. And so, for me, that move can often be a move into grief, can't it? And a lot of these stories, if not all of them, that's really what they're pointing towards. It's a descent, and it's a descent into the parts of ourselves which we find uncomfortable, and are moving towards grief rather than kind of finding ways to distract ourselves from it. For me, you asked about my own journey. I had so much grief in me, but it was unreachable. And I think, particularly in men's work, we see that a lot. If you ask a man just coming into, you would have experienced this a lot, Kurt. You ask a man to kind of notice what's going on in their heart, for example. And, a lot of men coming into this work, they will say nothing at all. I can't feel anything there. There's a numbness there, right? And they've, a lot of them through life, they've, it's just been plan A through plan A, which is how do I distract myself from that? And so oftentimes the portal in to get a man to feel anything is grief, right? It's the way in, which is why some of these stories work so well with them, because you can talk about grief in a way which isn't their grief. It's just grief, although it is, So for me, I guess, there was a personal part of your question. Yeah, I had a lot of grief, but I was finding ways to distract myself from feeling it.
What in particular ways did you use?
Oh, you name it. You know how it goes. Throwing myself into my upward corporate existence, drugs and alcohol, all the ways.
Yeah.
All the ways.
Yeah.
And so, and we were talking about this prior to hitting record. It really wasn't until my sister's death in 2007 where where I was taken to a place of absolute grief, ripped down the middle, and had no choice at that point, and kind of went into a true descent, and then I had a whole lot of things unfold in my life, which actually wound up with me ending up in a mental health facility. So mine was but it needed to come out.
Can you timeline that a little bit for us?
Well, this is around, began in 2007, and probably the next 3 years of my life
Okay.
were a deep passage through the underworld, and started to kind of reframe my new life after that around 2011, which is when I kind of stepped out of completely stepped away from kind of a corporate existence and moved into the work I'm doing now. But it had always been there. Even when I was back at university, again, I talked about the idea of this idea of storytelling and getting into depth psychology and Jungian style work. That had always been in the background for me. Yeah. Even through my corporate years. That's what you would just probably call it a hobby, but it was always there.
Yeah.
What I didn't realize until I went through that period of those years is that it was actually my calling.
Yeah. Okay.
It was so much. I was kind of like trying to keep it at bay, and maybe people listening have experienced that as well. Maybe you guys have as well. Because there's this expectation of you in the world to follow a particular outward model. And so, but I was never comfortable in that, guys. I was never, I remember.
In the corporate?
No, I wasn't. I'd go from kind of what we might call success to success.
Yeah.
But I was never finding what it was I was told to look for. You know what I mean? There was always this kind of like gnawing in my guts that something wasn't right and that I was pushing in the wrong direction. And it wasn't until I had those deep experiences of loss that I was actually I was able to turn towards my grief and then understand that I was going about everything the wrong way.
It's a humbling realization.
Oh man, it is when and I found that it seems to me around the age of, and Bly speaks about this in I and John actually, that particularly for a man around the age of 35, you have this understanding, or this again, maybe it's just a gnawing in the guts that something isn't quite right, and that there's things that you need to look at, and on almost every occasion, some sort of dissent is required.
Yeah.
And we talk about in our men's work, various ways of descending, and you see them all.
I'd love to speak a little bit more to the architecture of grief itself. I think it's a word that, there's books written on it, and you can find infinite resources. With the way that story works, with the way that myth really animates grief, I think it's different from anything I've ever heard out there. Would you speak to it through the mythopoetic lens, grief?
Well, I mean, for starters, it's not. You can't read it in a book. You can't. There's no particular. I once remember having a man getting teary and saying, he wished that there was an instruction manual for grief. Because he didn't know what to do.
Yeah.
He didn't know what to do, and maybe that. People often experience that, like if you're at a funeral or something, and you can't cry, and then you start to feel shame.
Yeah,
I don't know if anyone's experienced that. You're like, I'm not doing the things that I'm supposed to be doing.
What's happening?
And that's the point about grief is, you learn it on the job, and you gotta be in it to even know what it means and what it looks like and what it tastes like, and it's going to be absolutely different for everybody. Your grief is your grief. And there is no instruction manual. And you have to be able to kind of just, it's like being caught up in a tsunami.
Yeah.
In fact, the element of water is often connected to grief, and connected to the soul. And, I sometimes feel that sadness and sorrow is like, like it's almost like a a lake or something, or a river that we wash ourselves in to purify. Those are the tears.
Yeah.
But grief is just a tsunami. Like you feel like you're drowning.
Yeah.
That's the difference between sorrow and grief. It's still maybe a function of that water element, but it's just a completely different experience.
And
so
we
when you
don't-
get washed up on the shore after a period of grief, you don't know where you are. You don't know who you are.
Which way's
and-
up,
so
which way's down.
disorientated,
exactly.
so
you know.
washed out.
Yeah, like you know when you go under the water when you're surfing and you think you're going up, and then your head hits the bottom.
Yeah.
That's grief,
Yeah.
Oh,
right?
I know that feeling.
Yeah. And, we do not have the capacities to encourage, receive, hold, and be in reverence of it in our communities much anymore. Like the Indigenous communities that are alive, living, and
Oh, 100%.
they're with it. But,
Yeah.
and that's...
Well, that's the other part of grief. It has to be done in community.
Yeah.
Like, it's not, doing it alone is a dangerous experience. When we don't, I think this is very connected to the idea of trauma because undealt with grief, the longer you leave it, becomes trauma, right?
PTSD.
Yeah, exactly. So, in the short term, it can become depression, but the longer you leave it, it starts to turn into these more like that. It has to be expressed.
Manifest
it has to
somewhere,
be,
so
yeah,
it
that's
comes
right.
out in psychosis. Or
Yeah,
it comes
that's right.
out in,
And it's a community ritual.
Yes.
Grief is a ritual. That's another answer to your question.
Yeah.
Grief is a ritual.
Yeah.
And
can you speak to, just for those listening, like ritual might not be in their everyday language, can you just give it a little bit more?
I'd like to actually put that on you guys with the work that you do in
yeah.
iSōma.
I'm happy to.
Yeah, please. And then maybe I can kind of,
All right.
say, but I'd like to put that one back on you.
Yeah. Well, I'll speak to it first, and then for me, ritual really reminds me of how to be in rhythm with spirit. Like that's my short answer. It's a way that I bring into the everyday, ordinary life. Like, maybe I've woken up with a sore neck and a list of to-do things, and my son's at my leg for a snack or something. It's like the world around me is here, and ritual to me really connected to devotion, and the way that when I use the word devotion, it's less about like thinking about the word and where that comes from and our references, but more how we're doing it, like where we're moving into, where we're moving from when we're with ritual, or where we're with giving a deep reverent moment to connect back to what's more real, to the animate world, to you could say spirit, or some people use the word God or intelligence or life or whatever it is. And for me, ritual keeps me in rhythm with spirit, keeps me in rhythm with what's real. It's a self-accountability, but it's something that I have learned in the arena of the rising waves of people being called to something deeper. I think ritual is tried on as a costume at first because there's a lack of embodied elders to remind us what to walk with ritual is like, and so there's a bit of a costume change. But if you let yourself get eaten alive by grief, ritual turns into something where you're giving thanks for life. It's a moment where you're not expecting anything in return. It's a reverent moment of thanks, and that is a very pure, innocent tone to touch on a daily basis, regardless of what's going around. So for me, that's what ritual is.
It's beautiful. I'd have to second that. I just feel like ritual is that connection. It's conscious participation. Presence with what is and consciously participating in it, to beckon on and to call in and to invoke and to harness also the power of whether it's community for healing, to be held, to feel seen, to have that reflection of like truth when I can't see it. Whether it's calling on those animate forces, on spirit, on the elements, on the earth, on the directions,
on the ancestors.
it's in all of those cases, we have to consciously participate. And I think to live in that ritualistic way isn't so much around like that. I know there's a lot of taboo around ritual, you know, but I feel like it's just to consciously be a part of your experience and to cure it and cultivate it and call in those elements that keep us in good relation to the earth, to the stars, to our communities, to one another, and to ourselves. Yeah, whether it's ritual with sitting and meditating, ritual with, you know, consciously participating in breathing, regulating ourselves in moments of dysregulation, you know, consciously participating in calling in our community when we need to be, you know, seen or held, you know, instead of isolating ourselves and not having enough courage to participate and to show our vulnerability, to show our transparency, to show those parts of ourselves that are a little tender and a little sore and a little, we're afraid of revealing to the world, you know. There's so much beauty there, you know, and sometimes all we need, just like we were talking about with the reminding of a story, we just need someone to help remind us that this is how we heal. We heal together, and we have to participate. We have to consciously participate in our journey. And this is the ritual that we're calling people in for, because it's such good medicine.
Yeah, and it's like, it's a firekeeper job, because you have to move through the friction of your list of to-dos in the pace of life, in this rather than, and it brings you back into dun 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 dun, and there's the friction of them having to, I'm going to do it anyway, regardless of the list. Oh, but I'm tired. Oh, but I'm this. Oh, but I'll do it later. And so there's always a little bit of fire. And so you have a little bit of friction each day. So you're really fire keeping your soul as well with ritual. It's a disciplinary capacity that's grown. And to be with yourself in that way and self-accountability, there's trust developed. There's deep trust. There's so many people that we work with who either in everyday life choices or who want to be in service in facilitation or art or voice or whatever it is that they're doing. Trust in self is so huge. It's so shaky. And if you don't keep your word to yourself with ritual, it will be shaky. If you do keep yourself to your word in ritual, even if it's, you know, a minute in Shavasana on the mat, but you showed up to it. It's like you're showing up each day to life and rebuilding that trust in something bigger than you. You're restoring that. We want that order. We want to be held by something bigger. That's your world. But we are with ourselves, and we can only participate in community if we're with ourselves. You know, otherwise we're not giving to community, we're just taking. So if we show up when we're not doing ritual in our own life, we're expecting community to give us that which we're not willing to create in our own life.
So many threads there to pull on, isn't there?
Whichever inspires you most.
I know. No, I like the idea of conscious participation that you were talking about there, Kurt. You know, I mean, for me, ritual's a way of life.
Yeah.
And it's a remembrance. You talked about the fire tending part of it. You know, for me, there's always a part of myself which is tending that flame here, but I forget about them. You know. I am not I am this one that walks beside me, and all that. And this idea of ritual for me is actually going and sitting with that part of myself again and saying, I know you've got this fire going, even sometimes if it goes down to that very last ember. And when I return to that part of myself, let's call it the soul or the deep self, that's ritual for me. It's remembering that part of myself, which, you know, yeah, you talked about the to-do lists and everything there. For me, I got this idea in my head of, you know, it's almost like the particle and the wave.
Yeah.
And, the particle part of myself, and we're both, right, is sort of out there in the world with these roles and responsibilities and to-do lists and, you know, being a father and being a this and being a that. But I'm also a wave.
Yeah.
Right? You know, connected to the field. And it's remembering that. And for me, ritual is a process of a deep bow. And an acknowledgement that I am that. And that's where community comes in too, because obviously the wave is community, right? And you talked about the healing part of ritual. For me, that's the difference between immunity and community.
Oh, there's so many movements. One, I just want to name some so I don't lose them, and whichever we come back to, great. One is blood cancer, living with blood cancer, and how that shaped you. I don't know if you're ready yet to tell us the story you're living, but
Sure.
I might see if you're willing, if that's feeling ready. And the other piece that was coming to me was something that I just want to speak to, which I did, that I touched on, which is the costume wearing of ritual and how it's really life-taking. You know, it kind of takes life force in a sense because there's so much effort in it, but nothing, we're giving, it's a way where we show up if we wear a costume as it. And when I say that, I mean those who are, you know, working in the healing arts or are artists or are activists or whatever, and there's a strengthening of our sense of I as opposed to a shedding of our sense of I in ritual. And so if it strengthens the sense of I, then you're going there and you're just like, can you give me this thing? I want to do this spiritual connection. So I am, you know, that you're taking, as opposed to when you get humbled a few times and you fall on your ass, you realize, oh, I give first, so I receive. There's a reciprocity in it. And I don't, you know, when I look out into the world and see myself at the beginning of trying to begin to understand this and find my way, you know, out of medicine into the work that I do, I see someone trying to find their way. You know, I know that I went through a stage of irritation at it when I see it, but now I'm like, they're just trying to find their way in the fucking dark. And I'd love to hear your view on where we are as a world in our consciousness, where we are in one of the biggest stories and one of the biggest cycles, and why it's so dark and why we're bumping into everything and not able to see our way to connect to something that's greater, and why we're in the costume wearing as opposed to getting into the threshold and getting into that underworld and getting into that place of humility.
When you talk about the costume wearing, do you mean kind of like more ritual?
I'm spiritual.
Like the performative nature of, the spiritual gangster.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or even, you know, the ceremonialist or the new shaman, or even like the therapist that's got their certificate, like when it's strengthening that me. And
yeah, I understand that. I mean, I was actually I was laughing with Mel the other day with somebody who actually calls himself a shaman, like automatically. I'm like, really?
Yeah.
Maybe that's for others to say.
But self-appointed.
If your community termed that on you, then so be it.
Yes.
So exactly. Or even the word mentor and others, things like that. I feel like they need to be, you need to be
They're
blessed.
Gifted. Yeah.
They're gifted. And I just feel that, you know, if you start self-proclaiming that, I sort of, a few things happen to my body. So that's interesting for starters. But in terms of, I mean, the greatest story, which we're living through now, I mean, I thought you touched on it just before in the questions. Like, I mean, we're in the underworld. I mean, we're there.
Yeah.
And that's okay. That's not necessarily a disaster. You know, collapse and renewal are like an intertwined piece of hemp rope.
Can you give us some context for those who have no idea what that means?
Well, it just means we're in the descent right now. You know, we're in the shadow. I mean, everything we're seeing is
of our bigger cycle
of humanity, of our bigger cycle, right? You know, whether you want to call it Kali Yuga or whatever you want to call it, from whatever lens, that's where we are.
Yeah.
So we're confronting our shadows, and we're getting, you know, we're in a collective initiation. We're in a collective rite of passage right now, and you know, this is the tough bit. So we need to, like, a lot of this work for me is around, you know, having a compass or having tools to operate in the dark.
Yeah.
Not trying to get out of it, because it's a necessary path. And it's the only path. you know, and
It's
like
so funny because we have no idea. So many people have no idea we're in the under. We think we've made it. We're at the top of humanity, peak, right?
But it doesn't have to be grim and depressing.
No.
It's just it's part
An
of the cycle.
acknowledgement, yeah.
And that's okay. And that's the way I walk in the world. But I feel like we keep missing the opportunities.
Yeah.
Like you could take even little microcosms of it. Like let's take COVID for example. I mean, you know, if you strip apart what happened during the pandemic, it's a perfect arc of a rite of passage. And I think as collectively as humanity, we just missed. You know, we just missed. I mean,
Keep missing the opportunity.
Yeah. If you look at people like, you know, Eliard's work on rites of passage, there's always kind of there's three sections there. There's, you know, there's a separation, you know, and then there's an isolation, and then there's a return.
Yeah.
And we literally talked about ISO, you know, and we literally talked about being separated. Like we were using the language of rites of passage. We just couldn't hold it.
Yeah.
Like we just couldn't do it.
We made so much meaning of it, panicked, partied over it, created over it.
Yeah, and even that isolation part, you know, you're meant to have the ordeal. You're meant to come face to face with death. That's how every, you know, initiation rite of passage. And you couldn't pick up the paper without numbers of deaths. I mean, it was, and we just couldn't cope. You know, I remember people saying to me things like, "Do you know how many people are dying?" I'm like, I don't even know how to, of course, like people are always dying. Like, I don't know what the average is in Australia of deaths. I think it's around 500 a day or something.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I actually don't know.
It didn't go up much. People were still
panicked.
It's almost like people realized for the first time in their life
we're dying.
People die. And I'm like, it doesn't make it any less sad and any less grief stricken. But it's always there. It's just we do a wonderful job of hiding it.
Why do we do it? What's your opinion on why we run from it? Why?
Well,
how have we culturally ended up in a place where we pretend it's not even?
Well, I think that's the great fear, isn't it? It's the not willing to look at that part. It's connected to earlier parts of our conversations around not wanting to look at our grief. I mean, you know, we spend, you know, where we are in the cycle of humanity, we spend a lot of time trying to cure death. I mean, look at Western medicine, for example. What's the end game?
Life.
The end game is to try to find a cure for death, right? But what if death wasn't the problem?
Yeah.
What if actually death was the very thing that we needed in order to live, which I believe that it is. It's fundamental. If there was no death, there'd be no beauty. Yeah. There'd be no truth. There'd be no, like, no one's climbing Everest or painting the Mona Lisa or the Sistine Chapel if there's no death.
Well, it comes back to those seasons too, you know, like the beauty of the shift in seasons. And we're lucky enough here in Australia that we do have that shift, you know, from summer, you know, spring to summer to autumn to winter, like the death of, you know, the leaves falling from the tree and it becoming naked and then growing, you know, all this brand new greenery and calling in of the birds and the young, you know, little eggs hatching and everything, new life. Like if it was sameness, it would also be colorless.
Oh, 100%.
You know,
100%.
Same in our journey. We almost have tried so much to preserve life that we keep it like flat-lined. It's without depth. It's without saturation of that poetic beauty that death can bring. And when we can invite that within our own journey and not be afraid and hesitate and balk at death, but be like, yes, this needs to fall away and I need to move through that rite of passage of being uncomfortable for a moment here and looking at that part of myself or facing that part of myself or facing that fear that's, you know, held me back from feeling and numbed me out for so long. I need to collapse into it. I need to let it consume me so I can shift from this form that I have known thus far of myself and have the opportunity to transform, transfigure, and to move into a whole new form of, you know, of expression.
Well, that's happening anyway.
Yeah.
Like we're just not conscious of it.
Yeah.
You know? And I think you hit on a really good, when you said preserve life, I really feel like
Instead
that's
of
what our
give
culture's trying to do. You can't thrive
Yeah.
if you just
In
preserve
preservation.
life. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Delaying the inevitable.
Well, if you look at it through that lens, then keep the child in the womb, because that's a very safe space to be.
Yeah.
You've got to take a risk, though, or else both mother and child die, right? So, you know, we have to step into all of this. And we've all died. We've all died. The little d death. We've had so many
Little
deaths.
d death.
We've had so many deaths in our lives already up till now. And this gets back to the idea of grief and the idea of trauma. We have not
We don't
recognized
acknowledge.
those as deaths, and we have not honored them, ritualized them, and grieved them.
Yeah.
If you don't do that, you don't get the lesson.
Yeah, you're backed up.
It's you know what I mean?
Yeah, you don't
Like,
get the wisdom
Yeah,
from it.
we each time we little d die, we're initiated into something bigger, right? But we have to acknowledge it as what it is.
Yeah.
And remember. And so, yeah, part of the work is going back, isn't it? I'm sure you guys do this. And
It's part of alchemy.
yeah, that's right. And going back and actually recognizing the deaths that you've already had and doing the honoring, doing the ritual, doing the grief work, and asking yourself, what was I initiated into? Right? So that you actually become a bigger soul and not a smaller person.
Well, that's one of the...
That's good.
You know, it's one of the reasons that iSōma actually exists. It's one of the core reasons is to help people move back into rhythm with that we go through that cycle again and again and again. And as opposed to facilitating from the lens of, let me get you out of this, let me help you fix this, let me diagnose and heal this for you, let me help you cathartically release this, let me, you know, it's all about separation, ending, closing it, resolving, whereas we're the opposite. It's like there's nothing to resolve, there's more to embrace and be with. There's, instead of how can I always get a peak experience, or how can I you know, get this person from A to B in the best, most efficient way possible. It's about meeting people in that ritual reverence space, really, and being able to help them identify the pace that they need to, like, you embodying the rhythm, you embodying that cadence and knowing that, and helping their system come back into that, which usually means that it looks very different from the outside. You know, instead of the Martin Buber's work is I, thou, instead of I, it, instead of an objective lens on, you know, being a practitioner or a doctor or a coach or a healer or whatever, you're a teacher, an artist, a storyteller. Instead of like these people, what they need, you're in a deep listening and relationship with the moment and with them. And there's this, you're working with a field as opposed to working with an agenda to end something or get somewhere. And it's just the opposite way that we're, you know, that our culture has been conditioned with the history of colonization and the severance that we have from the cyclical nature that we are.
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly right. I'm feeling this idea when you're talking about endings. It's like we like neat little, it's almost as if we want to cauterize the wounds we have and just seal off the entrance to the cave. You know what I mean? And what we're saying is, no, actually, like, your wounds are a portal into who you really are. Your wounds are an entry point to your genius, to reconnection with your soul. And when you express your wounds in the world in a not in a victim kind of a way, but in a this is who I am. Like I call it dancing your limp, or something like that, right? It's then that you really express. You become yourself, and you express that into the world, which is the innate and unique genius that you bring to the community that nobody else can. It happens through the expression of your wound, not cauterizing it off
And making it pretty.
Making it pretty, or making yourself small around it. That I'm a victim of that, as opposed to it's an entryway to who I really am, right? You know, and I think that's
a powerful shift in perception around that.
And it's also the work of stories, because that's what we see the protagonist in the story do. Like, you know, these things happen. They have their moment with whatever it is, and they become who they really are as a result.
Do you have a favorite example?
There's any example. I mean, you and I have talked a lot about the lindworm, for example. I
Yeah.
mean, that's a perfect example of that, the stripping off of the skins, which is each time harder and harder and more painful as you get into it, right? But underneath it all is the person with the gift. The little boy with the golden ball in their hands is to draw from other stories, but also it's not some perfect Prince Charming under there or princess. It's a person with a look of grief on their face, a very ordinary looking human.
Extraordinarily ordinary.
There's this because we're moving towards questing together soon. Where I was listening to Martin Shaw's Smoke Hole. And he said, I was listening, even though we do rights work, it's really beautiful to hear different, especially through story. And he was saying that when he was one of his on all his wilderness vigils that he would hold, that he doesn't look for a look of triumph on their face when they return. He looks for defeat. And I've never heard a truer way to describe the way that we could do rights work or grief well. You actually allow yourself to be defeated instead of trying to triumph it again. Yeah,
there's a beautiful poem by Rilke, which is one of my favorite poems. It's called The Man Watching. And the last stanza of the poem basically says that, to grow as a human is to be defeated by greater and greater things. Isn't that beautiful?
Yeah. It so is. And that's like marries so well to having explored the fields of meditation for so many years. That defeat essentially is steering you back to that truth, that, that pure essential nature. Because it's like every defeat shifts a layer of like what I am truly not. And it brings me back closer to that core. And then if I can be defeated again, it shifts another layer. It's like dissolving away all that I've built up around myself that I have identified as. And it starts to take it away, until there's essentially nothing there that can be defeated and nothing that's at battle with anything. And can find ease and flow and is in this symbiotic relationship with life, neither for or against, neither being pushed nor pulled, but moving with.
Well, I say you can no longer be defeated because you realize you no longer have an opponent.
Exactly. Yeah. Isn't that such a beautiful thing? And it's so nice, even if that doesn't make a whole lot of sense for everyone right now, to move like on an experiential level, but to move towards that and explore the mystery of it, right? There's so much that calls us that we actually like love the idea of the mystery, but when we're faced with death, which is mystery, we balk and we're afraid. But it's like that's the thing you actually crave for, because the unknown is your nature. Like this universal intelligence that is beyond comprehension is your nature. But in order to move more fully into its saturating field, there has to be those deaths. After death, I have to be ready and willing to be courageous enough to just keep meeting it until there's nothing to be met.
But it's the ego that's standing in the way, of course. It's the little self, because the threat of annihilation is just too much.
Yeah.
And so it just steps in. And that's the work, I think. And to me, it's not getting rid of the ego. I think that's a bit of a misnomer. I think it's a maturation process. Like for me, the ego, well, to me, it's like a filter or a bridge, or a balloon is often a good metaphor for it, right? And the idea is to have an ego which works so efficiently that it allows the right amount of let's call it archetypal energy through, right?
Yeah. Beauty.
So it's not gone. in a person that you look at and think, well, there's a balanced person that's in harmony. It's just that the filter is working so beautifully well that it's unnoticeable. That's a mature ego.
It's
I like that.
yeah, that's so beautiful, Asher. I
Yeah.
love it. Are you I keep coming back to the tools of the underworld, you know, and I actually don't know this for you in your story. Your sister died in 2007, your mum around 18 months later, and then you went to a mental hospital.
No, well, I got diagnosed with cancer 6 weeks after my mum died,
Right.
blood cancer. And then just shortly after that, I ended up in that place. Literally couldn't take another step forward. I think it was just too much all at once. And I hadn't done the work that I've done now, obviously, and I just think it was too much. We talk about that tsunami. I was just overwhelmed. I was just drowning, and at that point in time, that was exactly the right place for me, you know. And it was almost, for me, it was like ground zero. Like if I'm in there, it was a blank canvas, and you know, and I was definitely suicidal at that point, and I had to ask myself the question: well, if you choose to live, like, what are you going to fucking live for, right? Like you've got your mother and your sister there as almost shining examples. Like to me, they became like role models, even more so in their passing, in actually how to live and how to die. You know, I think, you know, I'm going to draw on Leonardo da Vinci. I think one of his last sort of phrases was, all my life I thought I was learning how to live, and I was learning, when in fact I was learning how to die.
Oh, wow.
Right? And, you know, it was something along those lines for me. And yeah, and that's when I turned back towards, and I invite this for everyone. It's like, what were the images? What were the things that really lit you up when you were a child? Like, what really made your heart sing? Those are invitations into who you need to become, right? And so, you know, I talked about this sort of side thing that I always had around story and poetry, and so I just turned towards that.
Yeah.
Right, because those were the images that were alive in my heart.
So when you were in there, is that what you were with?
Beginning to, you know,
Okay,
or even the understanding of that's the direction that I needed to be drawn.
Got it.
In the beginning, it looked like more practical things like meditation and getting back into that more kind of spiritual side of myself, which my mum really had. And I actually grew up kind of pointing fun at her for that. That was just that was what happened for me. You know, I joke about my mum being this kind of, you know, hippie and all this sort of stuff, and it was it was only after her death largely that I kind of really turned towards towards that and understood a little bit more about who she was. And interestingly, she was a Kundalini practitioner.
Wow.
So one of the early things that I did was became a Kundalini yoga instructor, and I didn't really have any goal to teach it. At that time, it was me wanting to understand who my mother was.
Yeah.
Right.
What did you learn from learning that?
I learned a lot about who my mother was, actually, on all sides of the ledger.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it was a really revealing experience for me. Yeah, I felt a lot more than I had expected going in. Yeah. And I still use Kundalini teachings today, but they're kind of, maybe like you guys, they're kind of threaded in.
Yeah.
Like, I don't call myself a this or a that.
Almost weekly in the fifth direction.
Yeah, and it's a sort of Kundalini style meditation practice.
Yeah.
But it's not Kundalini per se, to the letter of the law. I find that with, you know, as I grow older, the way I guide and use what I know, it's sort of a blend of just all the different things. You know, I'll learn something, but I'll discard the bits that don't fit me, and I'll keep the bits that do, and I sort of get drawn in different directions. So I can't really, I'm not a this or a that. I'm just a
story of our life.
Yeah. Did you feel the same?
Yeah, story of our life.
Yeah.
But it's beautiful. It's like composing your own music instead of following sheet music, you know?
100%.
It's like these instruments, these tones at that pace, at this rhythm. You know the song you want to sing, you know, what you want to bring into the world. And I think that's really, I always find it really refreshing when people are like, you know what, I find this, I put that aside because that doesn't fit so well, but this and this and this, and they compose. It's just true artistry. It's like having colors and a canvas, right?
Yeah, I agree.
Every painter paints differently, even though they might have similar colors. Even the same picture of a sun setting, against 5 artists is going to look entirely different, so I feel like it's a really beautiful thing to honor in everyone. And those stepping in, especially for that invitation, because some people are, oh, I can't do that. I can't do that the same way you're doing it, so I shouldn't do it. Or I can't facilitate the same way this person does, and I really love their impeccability. And you're like, good, find that impeccability and that where they're coming from at a core level, but essentially sing your song, paint your picture, do your thing, because, tapping back into that field of genius, that everyone has that unique genius that's like the world wants to see that. That's your contribution.
And
what
it's
are you
liberating
contributing?
to be that authentic. It's so liberating.
Well, it's becoming who you truly are, right? I think there's a lot of facsimiles of other people out there, and I think and I think for me it's like I love the fact that I struggle with the question when people say, what do you do for a living? I'm like, geez, I don't know. It actually almost changes on a daily basis. It depends, and for me I'm like, I actually love that, the idea that I'm hard to describe even to myself.
Yeah,
it's hilarious.
A mystery.
Yeah.
Right? when I've gone and sat with people passing, eventually, because the families are really disorientated usually if you're close by, so you're kind of in the fold, and they're welcoming, but they don't really mind you're there. You're assumed kind of a friend, and then eventually they're like, who are you?
Yeah.
What are you doing here? You're like, well, nothing. I'm just here.
Yeah.
And then but I think that is, it took me a while to get comfortable with that, because at first I left radiation therapy, so studied medicine, radiation therapy, and I really loved it. And the parts of that I loved were the connection with the people. I just, really, when I would treat children when I was with the youth, everything else was tough. White walls, big bright lights, everything beeping. And so I had I decided to do that. I remember finding that career with the careers counsellor when I was 14, deciding my subjects for school. And I worked towards that for 8 years, and then started. So when I left, there was a big gap in me of like, well, what am I now? And that was that journey of, I'll try this and I'll try that on, and the titling. And now I'm like, I don't know. And isn't that enough? It's so easeful for me that I don't know. I don't know. And I think that the moments where I have felt the most ease is being in the presence of abuelas, like of grandmas, and their presence with you. When I've received it, like I received a ring once from an abuela after a prayer I gave. And for me, that was like my blessing.
Yeah.
And it was a wordless experience. And that's, I think, probably the most liberating part of how so far to where I've walked is a nothingness.
More important than a graduation certificate or something like that,
Which was valuable to its served its purpose.
Yeah.
Man,
there's so much coming up for me when I hear you speaking in this
Please.
way. I don't even know where to begin. It's kind of like I've just got all these images coming up in my head. But I guess this idea. Funny, I almost smiled to myself because the phrase that came up for me was, I wonder what I'm going to be when I grow up. And like, I'm a 56-year-old man, and I still don't know. I still don't know. And that's a beautiful thing, to be continually unfolding into the mystery. It's interesting, going back to my mother. She wrote me this beautiful letter before she passed. And at the end of it, she wrote, be like the river, constantly surprised by its own unfolding. And I'm like, that's how I feel I'm living my life now. It's just a beautiful not knowing.
That's, I was just, like, the goosebumps just ran through my system.
The other piece that came up when you were speaking, that before I lose it, is this idea that the way that we're given kind of the keys these days. You had a goal to become a radiation therapist, whatever it was, and there's an 8-year period there, right? But because we're so goal orientated in these lives that we're given, there's no room for change within those 8 years. The goal might actually change. And I think, and I feel like a lot of men that wind up sitting in front of me, they've done all the work to become this thing. It's almost like I have to get there, but somewhere along the line, they actually didn't want that anymore. But because we've become so goal oriented, you got to see it through, right? And so they end up becoming an accountant or whatever it is, and then they can go, I did what I said I was going to do, and so I hit the goal.
Yeah.
But
feeling
you're
so
not that
disappointed
person anymore.
Yeah.
It's like the orientation needs to be.
It's like
with
this is empty now. I'm finally here.
It's like why am I not feeling a sense of?
And I felt that when I got there. I remember getting to the hospital and going,
don't know if this is what I wanted.
How many weeks do I get a year holiday? I can't do this. I remember that was I was like, oh no.
Yeah. But the world around you is validating you by saying you wanted to do that thing and you got from A to B and you should be proud. And this is what success looks like and you're going to be happy. And it's like, and you're going, I don't know.
Yeah. Something's informed me otherwise.
Yeah.
Is there anything else on that thread before?
I don't think so. No.
I'd love to move to your wisdom around why story and the somatic experience and the imagery of it is so potent as a tool to navigate the underworld.
Oh, wow.
Take your time.
Look, I mean, story for me is, it's the earth speaking back to us, and it's that secular nature that Kurt was talking about before, to say that this is how it works, and when we listen deeply to the stories, there's just keys all the way through it, and you don't. I think if you try to say, if I tried to list them like a shopping list and say, look, here are the keys to the underworld, you're concretizing the story. I think you have to just leave it the way it is. I mean, my answer to that question is almost listen to some stories and see what happens.
Yeah, that's true.
And maybe not even figure it out, because that suggests a kind of logos move.
It'll work you.
There'll be something will well up inside you, and everybody knows what to do inside them. Like you can be confronted with the biggest quote problem, dilemma. You actually know what to do.
Yeah,
you know what to do. You know exactly what to do, and sometimes you just have to do nothing at all, in order for that to come up. Listen to some stories, read some poetry, do whatever puts you back in touch with your heart. And again, maybe that comes back to what you love to do when you're a child. Jung used to get people to do that. It's like, he did it himself. He would make these, I think he was in his 60s when he started making like little like matchstick castles.
Wow.
Because he used to do it when he was a kid, just to unlock something, right? So, that's the way, that's the way the soul works. It's not a straight line.
Yeah.
And sometimes you've got to go back to the beginning to get to the end.
Yeah. Almost always.
And I love that about story too, that it is exactly what it needs to be for every person at any stage of their journey. That's right. And that's right. And that's why we talk about this process of, feeding the story afterwards and literally saying to them, just stay with whatever image is, what image stopped you in the story? What image arrested you? And you'll often find that some people came to an image and they almost didn't hear the rest of the story. Yeah. Because they were and they just got caught there. And there's actually examples of that happening in stories. Like there's a moment in Parsifal where he sees an image of a black, red, and white image, which is very alchemical, but it's a black bird dead in the snow with blood.
Okay.
And he just falls into a trance. He has to be snapped out of it. That image, even as the person in the story arrested him. It's like and then the next step is to not rationalize the image, not say, oh, this is that. You have to just let it be there as the image, because it's obviously something's come up. And so can I just hold it without my logical, rational brain try to decipher it.
Mhm.
As soon as you do that, you flatten everything out. You know, James Hillman used to say, you know, if you think the serpent is your mother-in-law, it can be nothing else.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
wonderful.
Right?
Yeah.
And here's the thing, you know, my suspicion would be that the first thing that you think it is just your old story.
Yeah.
So it's likely
It's the
to be
loudest thing in
everything
the room.
but that.
Yeah.
I love that.
You know, because it's just your brain doing what it's always done, stuck in the
Mhm.
old,
It's showing you
stuck in the old
you're old.
wagon ruts.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So the
Mhm.
first thing that comes up, I'm like,
Mhm.
that's probably the one you want to swipe right.
Yeah.
Oh,
Well, I suppose
wow.
it offers that opportunity to move from that analytical mind, that reasoning mind, that rational mind to like intuit, like really deeply feel, allow it. As you said, just pause, like
Yeah,
don't even come to conclusion.
that's right. And it's interesting you use the word analysis there. I'm going to stop you there because if we look at the word analysis, what it means is separate and inspect.
Mm.
And so as soon as we analyze something, you're removing it from the field.
It's severing.
You're removing it from the community.
Makes sense.
Like, you know, let's take my my blood cancer as a great example. If I look at it and remove my blood cell and look at it under a microscope and say, this is a myeloproliferative neoplasm and it does this, that, and the other, but you're actually looking at that away from the whole of my body, which is a very different thing.
Yep.
Like you're not looking at the system, right?
Yeah, it's
So-
not. It's not in whole.
Yeah. So if we analyze and then diagnose and then fix and then place back into the system, you know, you've got to do the healing within community. That's how the body works too,
I love it.
right? But that's how story works. So if I take an image out of the story and then try to figure out the serpent is my mother-in-law, and then put it back, everything's changed, and I'm not healing anything. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Right?
Oh well, I'm actually like that's happening inside of me now.
Yeah.
I'm like,
Yeah. So we have to look at things as systems, and you know, I think a lot of, you know, we're using Western medicine as an example. That's often the way it works, right?
Yeah.
Like you wouldn't take a flower outside of its environment and decide what's wrong with it and then try to put it back. Like you've got to see what's happening
the
inside. It's the soil, right?
Yeah.
That's the community.
It reminds me of the, what was it, Yellowstone National Park, where they removed the wolves and it disrupted the whole thing. Like all the game, you know, had no predators. They overrun everything. It was like that one key core group of like wolves was keeping the whole
Everything in
organism in
balance.
check, that
Yeah.
ecosystem in check. Like when we remove something, it can be like that. And we're like, that's a problem.
Is that
Cut it
documentary
off.
that we watched?
Yeah. And it's just like everything has its place. Everything has its part. Everything has its purpose. And when we can step back, I feel like this is a big part of the work too, is like to be able to gain perspective. We need to not be so close. You know, if it's right up in our face, we can't see it, you know. I've often explained it's like looking at, if we zoomed into the pixels on a TV, we just see there's thousands of pixels. It doesn't make no sense. But if you can step back, all of those pixels are complementing everything else, and it can bring that greater picture into clarity and perception. So sometimes it's just that. It's like, how can we notice what comes, even when we're hearing story, but then step back? How can we create space to really let it just reveal itself? You know,
And then sometimes you don't have to do anything at that point. It's like we were talking about permaculture earlier. You know, once everything's working in symbiosis with, then you don't have to do anything.
No, it just does itself.
And
that's part
sometimes
of us being afraid that we don't have a role in this.
Yeah, 100%. We love and that we can do it better than nature can do it. You know, that this is part of the issue. But to me, in my dance with cats, so this is the thing. I think the vast majority of the work that I'm doing there is to just get out of my own way.
Yeah.
Right? Because I don't think that my body, you know, at least at the moment, it doesn't really see this as a major issue. And if I don't give it the airspace, you know, I just be in the dance, then, you know, I think largely I at least give myself the best opportunity of my body being able to just operate in this way. Right?
Yeah, I'm just taking it in.
Yeah. So,
Wow.
you know, if you're banging the pots and pans and saying
Problem.
it's like
Alarm,
it's,
alarm.
well,
Yeah.
let's say you were driving to work and you had a detour.
Mhm.
Like, you know, you can either say, oh, I'm going to be late for work, my car park's going to be gone, all this stuff, and then you just set up this cascade of problems and you know, and then that was an issue. Or you could just say, like, maybe I'll see something new. I don't know. Maybe this new way will.
It's like you're
I don't know. Like, there's so many, but infinite.
watching and listening
infinite
as
potential.
opposed to complaining.
Mm.
It's like relieve ourselves from creating unnecessary suffering.
Yeah.
For there is suffering that also serves us in our life, but so much of our suffering we create, we do unto ourselves, just as you sort of stated there. It's like engagement with an attitude that isn't complimenting. It's not bringing anything to the table, being so concerned and stressing ourselves to the T, because biochemically we're triggering all kinds of things. You know, it's like, why do we create so much unnecessary suffering for ourselves? And it's a really good thing to inquire into and to feel into, and to just check in, you know, in every human being. It's like, where am I creating unnecessary suffering? Because yes, there is suffering in life, of course, but there's also suffering that serves us. But there's so much that we create for ourselves that could be avoided in an approach in a totally different way, and we can relieve that pain. You know?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a Buddhist story around the 10,000 arrows, right? You know, the one, you know, it's like you get shot by the one arrow, like, just be with the pain of that. But, you know, what we then to do is to then, you know, shoot another 9,999 into ourselves.
Yeah.
And then we've got to deal with all of it.
Yeah.
When really all we had was just the one arrow.
Yeah.
Which happens from time to time, you know, and that's okay.
It does.
That's okay.
Is there, if it's appropriate, a story that wants to come through?
I don't know. Is there a story that wants to come through around that? Gee, there could be so many.
It doesn't have to be.
Yeah, let's keep
It doesn't
talking,
have
and
to
I'll see what happens.
Absolutely.
I'm also keenly aware of going into it, because I never know how long these stories are going to take. I might be sitting here for the next 45 minutes while a story
We're
comes
used to
through.
that.
You know?
We can't rush these things. We have to
that's right.
have good
That's right.
storyteller
Yeah,
tells.
I just
That's
wanted
right.
to create
Certain
an
way.
opening in case they wanted
No,
to
I'm
come
glad
in.
you did, actually, because I'll allow for that potential.
Cool. Is there anything you want to move to in the threads that we've pulled? Is there something coming?
Look, I think, and this is a beautiful conversation, by the way. I feel like I'm enjoying kind of the nature of the dance at the moment. Are there any particular topics with me coming in to the container that you wanted to touch upon around?
Oh, I mean,
Please.
I have my list.
Yeah. Let's feel free to tap in for a while.
For me, why I'm inspired to speak to you and why I'm inspired for people to be listening is to understand. I love to translate the way. I don't want to reduce myth and story to a modality. I don't want to reduce it to that. However, like, if I'm going to use language that might make sense, then in and of itself, it feels like such an ancient medicine, And I want to speak to it in that way. And I want to bring it in as that, as opposed to story. Because if I had heard this conversation 10 years ago, what the fuck are you on about? Story? What do you mean? How is it an ancient medicine? What are you talking about? Like, it just would have gone over my head. And so what would Asher 10 years ago be able to speak to Amber, who's going, what do you mean? How is story a part of navigating the underworld? Or what do you mean it moves you? What do you mean it's imagery? Like, what, can you give me like a bit of a preschool past me that? Because I would love people to tickle that part of them as well, and find their way to it, back to it, because it's so old and I think it's so alive in us, and there's such a diluted pop version of it coming through, but allowing those spirits back into their life again to support and guide them is something that, you know, I want to guide people to you in the fifth direction and what you do. So can you answer that?
Quite a question.
I know.
Look, I mean, you know, the first thing that's coming up for me is to just say that we're storytelling animals.
Uh-huh.
It's what we are. Like our psyche, our consciousness, whatever you want to call it, is not linear.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's not built on kind of surface level facts. It's the mind it's narrative. Like it's circular. You know, it's that's the way we work. We are, like I said, we are storytelling animals. It's how we make meaning.
Yeah.
And you know, I feel like as we step into where we are now, that has just been lost.
And why you say where we
Yeah.
are now
Well,
is in our culture.
Yeah,
now.
culturally, and where humanity is on the path.
And is that maybe because of the hyper intellectualization or
it's that? And I also believe too that each time we step into newer technologies of the way we communicate, we become more separate, and we lose the storytelling element, right? So it began pre-orally almost.
Yeah.
And you know, imagine the togetherness if you and I were just sitting together in silence and all we had was kind of, I don't know, drawing things in the dirt and stuff like that, right? But then, you know, we moved into an oral culture, which was really just all about story, right? But then each step we've taken, then it became the written word, right? And then but what did we do when we found the written word? The earliest forms of that were, you know, the Sumerian
images.
Well, when images first, absolutely, but when we first had some sort of script, it was, you know, it was carved into stones in Sumeria, and what were they? There were stories, Gilgamesh and Inanna, right? So it was an attempt to communicate through story, but each time, and then we move into the printing press. Well, that was a big time of losing touch with story, because suddenly stories became trapped on the page. So they don't have the same impact anymore, right? Can you feel that?
Yeah.
Like automatically there's a certain coldness about that. You know, a story
tone.
trapped on a page is cold. It has its purpose for sure, but there's a shift there. And then we shift into television and internet and now AI, and we're just moving further away from the true concept of what story, of who we really are as storytelling, of making meaning that way through sitting together around a campfire and listening to the elders tell a story.
Oh, it's so beautiful.
And those stories are them just repeating the story of the earth. That's, you know, if you think about our culture in Australia, the indigenous, it's made up of songlines. It's like the earth is literally made of connecting stories. And those stories were there to indicate where you should sleep, where you should eat, where you should stop, where you should not stop,
hunt,
which river did,
when you move.
All of that intelligence were built into those early stories. So when different peoples would meet around a campfire, they would share stories. They were actually earth
wisdom keepers,
manuals about, you know,
how to move,
where to stay, where to stop, where to have babies, where to not have, but all the things are all embedded in the stories. Take Iron John, for example. This is a beautiful little piece. You know, it's a very ancient story, but if you go all the way back, like pre-Grimm Brothers, just perhaps it's a story about iron. Because when we first discovered iron and began to move into the industrial age, a lot of the iron was found in the bottom of lakes. It was called bog iron.
Oh, wow.
It's called bog iron.
So that's the lake, and that's
so the wild man is essentially bringing up the bog iron from the bottom of the lake, but don't bring it into the center of the village and trap it. You know, like this is how you work with iron. Don't make it weapons of war. You know, or whatever. There's some deep early instruction there. Like, so you can look at it from as a map of the psyche, or an initiation story for men. But there's even more
to it,
right?
For all of us,
deeper,
multi-dimensional.
It's incredible.
So that's just an example of the importance of stories. I mean, didn't we feel something different when we heard a story when we were kids? I mean, this is the thing.
So is it
like we have you know, soul is about your imagination, and I feel like when adults get too much into their imagination, we say don't be childish or something like that. And I think a lot of people, what comes up for them when I say, come and listen to a story, that's childish. Like I used to do that when I
Wow.
was a kid.
Uh-huh.
I'm an adult now. I don't sit and listen to fairy tales. Like but I'm like, yeah, because you've cut yourself off from your imagination. You've
So
cut yourself off from your soul.
Oh,
Right?
it's so true.
Open yourself
so
up.
harsh.
Open yourself up. Be that child again. Like your soul is very playful. You know, Rumi said, your soul is here for its own joy. Right? Allow that imagination, that imaginative nature to come back again into your life. And that's going to, I say the distance between you and your soul is the depth of your depression. How's that for a way of looking at mental health?
And your second.
Right?
Wow.
The further you are away from your soul, the deeper the depressive hole you're in.
And
Right?
is that depression almost like a part of the path back to
Well,
NB?
you've got to, once that disconnection is there,
You
there's
gotta
no way
reconnect.
around it.
Yep.
There has to be a conscious descent. And by the way, if it's not conscious, the world will come and get you anyway. You're going down.
Yeah.
One way or another.
You could break
Yeah.
through.
Back
Yeah.
to the conscious participation in our descent.
Well, that's the conscious, that's what the Greek called katabasis, which is this idea of going there on purpose in order to find the gold. The gold at the bottom of the well, which other people have thrown away. You know, the gold coins. The old idea of flicking a gold
well
coin.
of grief.
Yeah, the well of grief, exactly. To actually take yourself there,
That
why
requires
not
courage.
guide yourself within community into those darker parts of yourself rather than wait for the calamity?
Oh, totally.
Because
it's so much easier.
Because if you
So much easier.
can't listen to the voice of your soul, the only way it can be heard, and it will be fucking heard, is to go out into the world and create an accident. Accident. Right? And if you continue to not listen, that accident just worsens.
Yes.
I call it the tickle under the chin, the punch in the face, and the train crash.
Yeah.
Like, if you ain't listening to your soul, the only way it can get your attention is to manifest stuff in the outside world.
Yeah. Louder and louder and louder.
Louder and louder and
Which
louder.
is, again, coming back to that same piece of like unnecessary suffering.
It's exactly
if we
that,
learn
right?
to listen first.
And that's the
If we learn
slowing
to
down
listen.
part. And that's the ritual part and all the things we spoke about in the beginning of the conversation. It's actually tuning into the voice of the soul.
And if you firekeep
Before it has to
chaos.
set fire to everything.
To get
Gotta
your
burn
attention.
it.
Yeah.
That's the burn all down.
Yeah.
But it's that if we firekeep on a daily basis, ritualistically, we will have the courage to face it.
We will. But
lose
also
that.
we'll it won't, the fire won't have to be as great because we're in touch with the voice of the soul, the small
have to burn
voice,
it
the
all
subtle
down.
voice, the little voice, right?
Yeah.
And the end game of that is if you keep not listening, it'll take your life away.
Yes.
And not as a punishment, but as like, well, you're here to execute the instructions on your soul. And if you ain't going to do it, man, I'm just going to remove you from the planet. Like it's not it's done out of love.
Yeah.
It's done out of love.
Yeah, it's not torture.
Yeah.
It's not trying to torment.
No, it's just like, oh, well.
Wipe the
The
slate.
amount of times
Yeah.
I've said that to people, they're like, why is this happening? Why is this happening? Everything's falling down. I was like, it's not here to
It's an
torture.
inside job.
Yeah. This is like
Listen.
showing you exactly what needs to
Yep.
fall, what needs to be born, what needs to be seeded, where you need to step in instead of falling back. Like it's not here. Life isn't here to torment you. That isn't its nature. It's here
No.
to support you in that evolutionary growth.
What if it's a mentor, not a tormentor?
Yeah.
I
You're
think,
full of them.
Good ones today.
but in my own personal experience, like I was so deep in my not listening that, it took the death of my sister and my mum and a cancer diagnosis in order for me to start listening. Anything less, I wouldn't have changed. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I wouldn't call it a blessing, but it's certainly not a curse either. It's just the nature of of the volume that I needed to hear it.
Is required. Yeah.
Mm.
And that's why I think we can also alleviate that frustration that comes when we are, especially in facilitation or even in family units and communities, when we're seeing somebody really struggle and not listening and not listening and not listening. often people that love that person or care for that person anyway, you become frustrated, you know, you're like, come on, man, it's like right there. You need to drop that or change that or look at that or address that or stop running and escaping. But as you said, sometimes it needs to get to that volume. So just with that tiny insight and that attitude shift, we can be like, you know what, it's okay. I can feel more at peace with this person and just accepting and allowing them to walk in the way they need to for as long as they need to. And whenever they require any assistance, I'm here. But if they need that sound to get real loud and that thing to punch them hard in the face, then so be it. Who am I to take that from them? If that's their way through, that's their way through.
Yeah.
I can offer invitation, of course, and I may have done many times as we do in families and communities in this work. But, you know, what is it, like you lead the horse to the water, but you can't make him drink. It's like we can never stop offering the invitation, but also find peace in our hearts to allow others to do things in their own time, in their own way. I feel like this can alleviate, again, unnecessary suffering. We suffer because others are suffering, but we can relieve ourselves of that too.
No, I agree. It's you can't save anyone. You can just love them.
Yeah, it is so true.
I think we're going to close there.
I like that.
I would like to go forever, but I think we should come back for part 2. Unless the story wanted to sneak in.
Well, I was trying to. I don't want to force anything.
Yes, I think so.
You know, I'm thinking of I think I'd be kind of like trying to fit something in which isn't quite there. Is that okay, guys?
Yeah, absolutely.
But you know what we should do? Let's come back and let's kick off a conversation with a story.
Yes.
And then
jam
speak
on
into
the story.
it. Yeah.
I'd love to.
So down.
All right.
Let's do that again soon.
Perfect.
Asher, are there any last words that you want to leave people who are listening with from your soul?
Oh, look, honestly, this has just been a beautiful conversation, and I've enjoyed every moment of it. And I think everything that I need to say has been said. So, other than just deep gratitude for you two and what you do in the world. So, thanks for having me.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be weaving with you. Thank you so much. Bye.